This is Alyssa Ljub, and you are listening to Tanya Tate Presents Skinfluencer Success podcast.
This is Tanya Tate. Skinfluencer Success.
You are listening to Tanya Tate Presents Skinfluencer Success. Where do you go when you have questions about sex education? My guest is a sex and intimacy education coach, content creator, and host of Alyssa Explains It All. She's also known as the girl with the vulva pillow on Netflix The Circle. Welcome, Alyssa Ljub, to the Skinfluencer Success podcast.
Thank you for having me. I love
Yay.
that intro. I love the way that I've built my presence in the world. It makes me so happy. I have my vulva pillow here, actually.
Oh, wow, there it is. Do you know what? I was
She
hoping
is.
that you would bring it.
She's always here. She's always ready to go.
I needed to see that. That's kind of cool.
Can
You just buy them off the internet, or did you have it specially made? Or
the woman who makes them she's a woman in Australia, and I want to say that she makes them to order because they take a little while to get here, but they're like pretty anatomically correct. Like you can like lift up the hood and there's the clitoris. You could like feel on the inside the internal structures, and then like you can open it and you can like fully stick a finger in the vaginal canal. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is very educational because we are about education. So, Alyssa, I want to start off, let's talk about your story. So I think it starts off when you moved to LA. So
Yes.
You moved to LA. So how was this the start into the sex education industry?
Well, when I moved to LA, I was kind of taking a leap of faith. I really wanted to work in makeup, specifically doing like special effects for horror movies. But yeah, so I wanted to learn how to do special effects makeup. So that really is mostly in LA, and I live in New York. So I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a leap of faith. I'm going to give it a shot. I moved March 1st of 2020, thinking that the pandemic was not going to be a pandemic. I was like, this is going to be like everything else. It's going to be fine. It's going to brush over in a couple of months. And like every step of the way, I couldn't believe what was unfolding like everybody else. And so the whole makeup industry was completely like, there was nothing happening. And so I needed a job, and there was a somatic sex coach who was looking for an assistant to help her move all of her in-person clients to be online while the pandemic was happening. And I've always been like very open about talking about sex and sexuality. My friends and I will be like, we'll be anywhere and just talk about any part of it. And so when the job came across, not my desk, but my texts, I was like, this is perfect. This is great. And when I started working with her, it just like changed my whole perspective on sex, on sexuality, on what, especially from the female perspective, what we completely don't learn at all about our bodies. And that just like changed everything for me. And then a year later, I just applied for the Circle thinking like, we'll just whatever, see what happens. And I really think the vulva pillow did them in, and they loved it. And I got
to go back, Alyssa, because people are going to be like, what is a somatic sex coach? Like, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, yeah. So a somatic sex coach, somatic means of the body. So if you're a somatic coach, you're doing stuff that is a little bit more hands-on than a regular sex coach. Like I'm not certified in any somatic practices, but my old boss was. So what she would do is either through a guided session, which is really what she was doing during the pandemic, or in person, she would teach women about the different parts of their vulva, have either them feel it, or she would actually go and feel it with gloves and obviously lots of consent and all of that stuff. And it's meant to rewire the neurological pathway between your genital tissue and what you receive in your brain. So it's helpful for people who've had traumatic experiences, or she had a client who had cervical cancer and was completely numb in the entire genital area. And after a couple of months, started to actually regain her sensation there. And she used to say all the time, the orgasm happens in your brain, and all of that feeling happens in your brain. And so if you can get those neurological connections to line up again, you're in business. And so that's what she was doing, is she was teaching women about how to do that for themselves, or she was guiding them through a process that she might be performing, pre-pandemic. But yes, that's what a somatic coach is.
I needed to ask that.
Yeah.
So for you, you were getting all this education and experience really of being there, and as a woman, I think it's different for me sitting here because I've explored myself many times, because that's my job.
Mm-hmm.
And I've explored many other women as well.
Mm-hmm.
Being an adult actress, that's like what we do, and things are different. But it's, if I wasn't in the industry, it would definitely be something that I wouldn't be as aware of.
Totally. I can't tell you how many people, like, I always feel like I'm never doing enough. And I'm like, am I even teaching anybody? But the reality is most women, and I mean, really on both sides of the fence, but I think there's a little bit more shame involved on the female side of life. But most women have no idea, like, what their vulva is. They've never looked at it. They've never touched it. And they still associate it with being shameful or embarrassing. Or there's been this whole narrative that vaginas are like stinky and they're dirty, and like, that's just not the truth. It's an organ, so it smells like an organ, but it's not like something to be ashamed of or be scared of. And actually, your whole sex life gets so much better when you know what you like. If you don't explore yourself, how are you supposed to direct anybody else? They're not mind readers. You have to be able to tell them what to do, and you have to give them the map, and then they'll follow it. I promise.
That is so right. So for me, I've made lots of movies, and I've been in movies where, let's just say, the chemistry wasn't as strong. And I would always think, what am I going to do? How am I going to turn this around? So I would always know what I liked and what like excited me. So if I was working with someone in a movie and I'm just like, you are not doing it for me, mate. Yeah. I would literally put myself in my head and I would think of things that would excite me, or I would direct the action so the other person would be directed into a certain area or a certain place. And I would always think about the fans, because of course, we're creating content. We're creating content now with our podcast, and we're always creating something new. And so I would think the fans are going to watch this. They're going to want to like really enjoy it. Yeah. So I would literally just direct them to the things that I liked. And it was like,
yeah. That's how the magic happens. Yeah, you turn it all around. Yeah, and it's a shame that we've been conditioned to feel like touching ourselves and exploring ourselves is so outside of the realm of like normal sexual activity, because it's just not true. Like, it's so normal. And even just from the perspective of, like, you always want to operate from the perspective of pleasure. You want things to be pleasurable, and that's the point of so much of sex education. But a lot of it's like a safety thing. Like, if you have no idea what your vulva looks like or feels like when it's normal, how the heck are you going to know when there's something wrong?
Yeah.
You won't.
And you just said then, some people, it's shameful. And it's embarrassing. It's such a big thing, isn't it? Like, for me, sex is, I'm very open about it. Before I was in the industry, I would feel not as confident about myself, not as confident about my body, and not as confident about my personal area. So for people that are like listening, we have men and women that listen to the show, and I'm sure this show, there's going to be a lot more women as well listening, because of what we're talking about. So talk us through, this shame. Where does it come from, and how how as a society do we get over it?
It's so woven into the experience of being a human being, and primarily for women, it can date back. I mean, I was looking at the history of female sexuality for a while, and I was looking at all of these events in history that kind of dial up to the way that we feel now. And one of the things that I think is so interesting is the beginning of the witch trials. A lot of that, this was like when that all started in Europe, it was like the 1600s, and a
Yeah.
lot of the women that were being accused of witchcraft and were then being mutilated, hung, killed, etc., they were just people who embraced their sexuality. And that could be by any definition. Like it was not by any one definition. So like from the start, we've just had this subliminal messaging that sexuality is for anybody who is male or male presenting, and anything that is feminine, you're supposed to have this sort of purity complex, and there's a moral value tied to sexuality. There's a moral value tied to virginity. And in reality, none of that stuff is real. Like, there is no medical way to determine if someone is a virgin. And so there are all these like weird practices around the world, even today, where people are
Mhm.
checking for a hymen, and that's not medically accurate. You can't do that. But there's so much morality tied to our sexuality, and it goes back
Mhm.
really far. It's just been the way that the female experience has always been. And even when you think about things like the Adam and Eve story, we when you look at that story, whether you believe in it being real or fictional, the way that it was written from a male perspective, and in that male perspective, there is the first person who was created, and the second one was created in the image of the first, and was the one who started the original sin because she was tempted into eating an
Temptation.
apple. And so
Mhm.
it's like it's built into the fabric of the female experience that we are easily swayed, we are easily tempted, we have less of a moral compass, and we needed to be guided by others. And it's really a system that's created to prevent us from feeling empowered. Because if we feel empowered, then we are less likely to need partnerships that were previously something that women depended on for
Mhm.
most of history. So it's really like it's tough because it's built into the fabric of who we are. And now we also are in a place where we're getting very conflicting messages in like the media space. So
Yeah.
you could be driving down parts of Hollywood and see billboards for strip clubs, and you can see like, people in sort of sexualized ads and that kind of a thing. And you'll see that everywhere. But at the
Mhm.
same time, you're still going to find people and communities that will absolutely chastise a woman for embracing her sexuality at all. And we're seeing that even in the way that like laws are being created now. And even in the past
Mhm.
couple of years, the laws that have changed for sex work online, like that, and in person, all of that is a subliminal message that our sexuality is not appropriate and our sexuality is not accepted. And the reality of it is appropriate to know how your body works, and it is
Yeah.
appropriate to know how to interact with other people. It keeps you safe. It helps you to have more fun and have it be more enjoyable. And like it or not, sex is not just for procreation. Like the clitoris is a part of the vulva that has no function aside from pleasure. So that's that. It's in the proof is in the pudding, but it's very
It
tough. It's very tough for people to embrace because we spent a
yeah.
lifetime with mixed messages and primarily hearing that we had to be pure and virginous and whatever.
Mhm. I think a lot of the media, there's this is not political. I never ever get political because
Mhm.
politics and me, we just don't mix.
It's messy.
However, a lot of laws are being brought in, a lot of pressure groups are coming in to try and, you know, women have been able to express ourselves. There's so many places where we can express ourselves, express our sexuality. There are platforms available where we connect with our fans, OnlyFans being the bigger one. And we do it because we want to. you know. And I think there are people coming in, and it feels like we're going backwards with education. It's, you know, they don't want us to have a presence online. They don't want us to enjoy sex. And then when it comes to education, even at younger ages, especially some of the states, you're going to know a lot more about this than me. Some of the states are changing the laws to make things not okay, to teach children, you know, about age appropriate sex education.
Right. Yeah.
And it's so many mixed messages. Go on.
I was going to say, it is a lot of mixed messages. And it also, what I think is really important in the way that you phrased it, is age appropriate sex education, because obviously you're not teaching a fourth grader like the ins and outs of sex. You're not doing that. But it's important that they understand the names of their body parts, because that drastically reduces the chance of any sort of sexual assault or inappropriate sexual behavior, just by knowing the names of their actual body parts. And it's frustrating too, because there's a direct correlation between the states that provide and require comprehensive sex education, which means it's beyond abstinence only. There's a direct correlation between the states that require that type of education, and the rate of teen pregnancy is drastically lower, and the age in which people start having sex is much later in life. So it's almost like when you've demystified it, when you've taken away the power from it being something that you shouldn't do, it ends up being a lot less of a tempting thing. It's the same thing with, like, I'm Italian. My grandfather, my nonno, would make wine. When I was a kid, they would let me have little tiny bits with lots of water, but there was always like just wine around. And so now I'm 29, and like, I'm not really that much of a big drinker anymore. I feel like it's just never real, like, it's fun sometimes, but I've sort of like, it never was really that fascinating to me. And I think it's because I grew up around it. So it just was not, everybody wants like a little bit of the forbidden. They want something that like they can't have right away. And it works the same way with sex education. If you just teach them and show them what's actually happening in a way that is comprehensive and has some level of focus on pleasure, but also on safety, you will reduce the chance of people having sex early in life, and you will reduce the chance of them having children early in life, which is also crazy, because those same states that require abstinence only education and then have high rates of teen pregnancy also happen to be the states that don't want abortion to be something that is accessible to those people. So it's like, what are we doing? It's so conflicting. It really is.
Just like, this is why I think education and sex education is so important for people to, you know, to know about it and to hear about it, and to be educated by people that are presenting the facts, not a slanted, this is the view that I want you to have. It should just be, these are the facts, and there's no hidden agenda behind it.
I agree. And it's interesting too, because in the sex educator space, especially on like social media and stuff, when you're sharing information like this, because sex and sexuality is not as broadly researched as most other health related topics, there's going to be some topics that will have some sort of like, people will disagree from time to time and say, well, I saw this study and it was this, this, and this. Well, I saw this study and it was, there's not enough information a lot of the time to always have one single answer. But what I think is really interesting is if you are a person in the sex education space, it is so much more important that those conversations are had. And I've had people come on my posts who are educators and, say this is something that I saw, and like potentially trying to correct me, but ultimately we're all learning together. And that's what I want out of this experience, is for all of us to learn together, because it is such like a marginalized topic. And I would so much rather the conversation actually be happening so that there's actual truth flying around here.
Yeah. And so I want to take you to the Netflix show the circle. So talk to me about that. You know, you're working as the assistant for the somatic sex coach, and then suddenly this opportunity. How did it come about, and how did you get to take part?
I just applied. There's like an online application, and I filled it out. I did a little video, and the whole process took like something like 8 months. Like we were doing call after call after call, and every time I moved along in the process, I was like, really? Okay. And I couldn't believe it. And then we get to like the end of actually almost about a year or 2 years from now, or 2 years ago, we get to like the end of July, and I get a phone call from my casting director, and he just says, you're going to England and you're flying in 2 weeks. And I was like, okay. And so in that whole process, I knew that they loved the sex coach thing. They loved that I was willing to talk about sexuality. And that was like, I understood that they wanted me to be like the sex lady, which is fine. Because in real life, I am the sex lady. So sure, we'll carry it through to the Netflix show. And when I went to film it, one of the most interesting parts was when we did the intro, which is like the very beginning where I say like, I'm Alyssa, I'm from New York, I'm 27 years old, whatever. And they had me say, I'm really comfortable saying the word vagina, and then say vagina, vagina, vagina to like all these different cameras over and over again. It was like just so silly. But like, and the best part was when that trailer came out, my parents know about what I do. They actually are like very, very proud and embrace it. But when that trailer came out, my dad went, nice. I was like, I'm sorry. It's just, it was really funny. And then during the rest of the show, you have producers in your ear throughout the entire filming process. And so they always wanted me to like sex it up. But in reality, I'm not really that like sex forward in like just my day-to-day life. And I find that a lot of the time with people who are like sex educators, where actually almost every person that I've spoken to who is a sex educator now is super vanilla, like just like honestly just nerds for the research more than anything, and okay with saying the word vagina, and that seems to be the formula. And so they really thought that I was going to be on the show and be like very flirty and sex it up, and instead I was a psychotic competition-driven woman who had notes from literally ceiling to floor on all the different people in my season. And when I finally got eliminated from the show, because spoiler alert, I didn't win, but it's okay. When I got eliminated from the show, one of the producers came to my room to like, like check in and thank me for my time. It was very nice. And then he goes, I have to tell you, you had a lot of the producers huddled around your screens during this filming process because you didn't do at all what we thought you were going to do. And I was like, what do you mean? And he straight up said to me, we thought you were going to be like the thirst trap of the season. And I was like, oh, yeah, you miscalculated, because that's unfortunately not the vibe. But ultimately, coming off the show, having the platform that I have is amazing because it's a very mainstream audience. Like it's people who are not necessarily like sex industry people. They're people who are Netflix watchers. And that gives me access to a really special group of people who are curious, but not totally thrown into the whole process. And I'm at the sort of I'm at a crossroads for them where it's the infancy of them learning about sex education and sexuality. And for a lot of people, the messages I was getting right after the show, it was like, I'm just so happy that you're here. I'm just so happy that you exist and that you're talking about this. And that made me feel better on its own. And it's been really special and very cool.
I think because you're not a sex worker, it gives you a bigger, it doesn't give you a bigger platform. It's a free card, really, isn't it? If I was to be like, I've got this education, I want to share it with you, it's going to be more difficult for me because they're going to be like, oh, well, she has sex for a living, or she's just so comfortable in her body that I'm not sure people would take me. So a lot of people would listen because, I've obviously done the job, so I know what I'm doing. But I think there would be a lot of people that would immediately cast me aside
Mm,
because they wouldn't think that I would be worthy, or I'm not somebody that they aspire to be.
mm,
And again, we're coming back to that inside feelings, isn't it? If somebody is not worthy of themselves, they can't embrace others, and they can't love others, and they can't appreciate others for what they have to offer.
mm-hmm,
And there's it's about the censorship, isn't it? And that's kind of all inbred
mm-hmm.
into people. It really is. It goes really deep.
It really does. It really does. And even just the way that people feel about sex workers being so like volatile and just like very all over the place it's a lot. And I think more than if someone's looking for information about sex, I think they would take it from a sex worker, but I think that they would also be like, well, this person's a professional and I need someone who's maybe like beginner level, but there's absolutely people who want advanced information. But I think you're right that it's also people being judgmental about sex workers in general. And I always find that to be so ironic and weird because do they not watch porn? Of course they do. So how are you gonna throw the first stone? You literally watch porn. What? I don't get it.
Thank you. People do. They watch porn. They watch pornography, and then they're like, let's not have this online. Let's not have this available. Let's hide it all.
Right.
Let's stop them. And there's been cases, where people have been so adamant against it, and
Yep.
later we know
It's
we know what
always
you
Yeah, they're always telling on themselves. Always. Even the people, it happens a lot where people who've had very strong stances on like the LGBTQ community end up having some internalized homophobia because they have queer feelings or whatever, queer identifying themselves and they don't want to embrace it. It's always like, I think in general, and this is something people say on social media all the time, but it's so true. If anybody is being hateful or judgmental to you, it's most likely because they are dealing with something themselves, and a lot
Mhm.
of the times it's jealousy. Like
Yeah.
if you really think about why are you so angry about a sex worker doing her job, it's probably because you know that you're not that comfortable performing that way. You're not
Mhm.
that comfortable with your body, and this is a person who has fully embraced who they are and their
Yeah.
sexuality, which is like a heroic feat nowadays. And so, it's hard to see other people living your dream. And so they're haters.
Yeah, yeah. I get a lot of it, but for me, I think to myself inside, I'm happy, I'm
Yeah.
confident, I'm worthy,
Mhm.
I'm loved. And then I think about the people that are throwing it, and I think that they must have all those opposite feelings inside them. You
Mhm.
know, the jealousy, the hate, they
Mhm.
and so the feelings that they have inside themselves, they just project it. And some of them
Totally.
like projectile vomit. They're so
Yes.
hateful. And
Yes.
it makes me kind of sad as well, in a way, that
Yeah.
you must be living such a miserable, horrible life, because we're on earth to learn,
Mhm.
and we're on earth to find joy and to enjoy life and to
Mm.
embrace it and to live each moment. And these people must be so sad. I
Yeah.
I just wish that they would just sit down and be like, let everyone do their own thing as long as it's not harming anybody else.
Yeah. I agree. I agree so much. And I think all the time when people I'm very lucky I very rarely get like actual mean comments. But when I do, I always think I've never ever in my life seen a stranger on the internet and said, they have to know my opinion. They have to know my negative opinion. I've never felt that way. Like, so if you do, I don't understand already. Like I don't understand where you're at. And so
Yeah.
I'm not going to try. And it's not worth the energy. But I remember a long time ago, I had a therapist tell me that the way that you value yourself is is like is so important. So if you have issues with let's say you have an issue with sex workers in general, or sex work, or sex education. I would encourage you, or any of those sort of like hot button topics, I would encourage
Mhm.
you to really sit down and think about what in your life gives you value. Like, what makes you a person of value in your life? And if your answers will tell you a lot. Like, so when I
Mhm.
think about that, I think about, I'm a great friend, I'm a great daughter, I'm a great sister, I'm a great girlfriend. I have my platform, and I can go on and on and on, because
Yeah.
I've put enough work into it where I'm like, I need to value myself. And if
Yeah.
you can do that, that's amazing. But that takes practice. Like, it takes
Yeah.
time and energy and work.
Yeah, it does. And I'm just glad that we're sitting here now and we are bringing these thoughts to the people that are listening. Great. All the people that are sitting there like that are counting off on the fingers all the great things about themselves. And
Yes.
you know what? If you're sitting there and you're thinking, I can't think of something, you can think of just like the littlest thing.
Yeah.
The littlest thing, like just saying hi to the neighbor.
Hmm.
You're a good neighbor
You're a
today
good
because
neighbor.
yeah, and there's no but. There's no but. That I think a lot of people put, I am good or I am this, but
Hmm. Yeah.
however, it's
Yeah.
like take all that away
Take it
and
away.
own it.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I think that's so true. You could think of even the smallest thing. Like, did you shop at a farmer's market? Amazing. You support small businesses. There you go. Amazing. Good for you.
Yeah,
Have you
just
have you subscribed to somebody on OnlyFans? You're also supporting a small business.
yes. Have you listened to podcasts? Our podcasts?
Exactly. Supporting
Amazing.
small businesses.
Yeah, exactly. So I want to talk about the places where you are able to educate people.
Hmm.
So talk to me. You are the host of Alyssa Explains It All, and talk about your TikTok and your Instagram, because people are listening and be like, where can we find this out, Alyssa?
Yeah. So it's tricky in any of the sex education or sex adjacent fields. So, Tanya, you got to know this very well. We will get kicked off of platforms like it is nothing.
Yeah.
Especially TikTok hates me. TikTok does not want anyone to see anything I share. So I do
Mm.
post on TikTok, but not that much of the sex education stuff, because it will simply get me nowhere and more likely get me banned. so
Yeah.
so that's kind of challenging. But I do have the podcast that comes out every Tuesday, and we've had some really amazing people on. Actually, people that we've gotten connected through Tanya, which is cool.
Yeah. I have a
And
publicity company as well. So yeah,
yeah,
I connected for some of my adult stars, content creators to come on. So thank
yeah.
you for having them.
Oh my God. Thank you for connecting us. I learned so much through that whole experience. And one of my favorite like points to drive home every time I had them on was like, you wanted to do this. You are not a
Yes.
victim. You are not, you are not. This is like kind of a tangent, but it's not really. I watched 50 Shades of Grey for the first time like last week. And the biggest issue I had with it, which if you haven't seen it, don't. But if
I
you
didn't
have,
even watch it. I'm just like,
it's
it's not.
it's so boring. And if you're desensitized enough to sexuality, Tanya, I'm telling you, I was like, this is when does the good stuff happen? It was so boring. It was so boring.
Didn't
But
miss anything.
you didn't miss a thing. But the one thing that frustrated me is Christian Grey, who's like the guy who is interested in like BDSM and kink and is introducing it to somebody who's not. He has this whole backstory that he was sexually assaulted by his mom's friend when he was 15, and the mom was also a drug addict, and that ends up being what like fuels his interest in all of these other like dom sub activities later in
Mhm.
life. And that made me so angry. That made me so angry, because that's simply not how it works. For some people it might be, but for most
Mhm.
people it's not. And you've made something that is already stigmatized further stigmatized, because you're
Yeah.
essentially saying that I have to be traumatized to be interested in this, and that's just not
Yeah.
true. And it's the same thing with sex workers. You don't have to be traumatized to want to do that work. It's
Yeah.
fun, and you get paid really well to do it.
You might
So
just really like sex.
exactly. Exactly. If you really like ice cream, work at an ice cream shop. I don't know what to tell you. Listen.
So
Anyways,
back to your podcast.
yes. So on the podcast, every Tuesday we have people who are we've had people who are sex experts, who are sex therapists, people who work in the sex industry. And then we've also had some really fun and entertaining people on who have just had really interesting lives that when you ask them about their dating life, it's just like fascinating. And so we've had a really fun mix of guests on, and that comes out, like I said, every Tuesday. And on Instagram, I do share as much sex education as they will let me. I do get content violations a lot. So I try to be careful with what I share.
Yeah.
But I just set up subscriptions on Instagram, and I'll be able to share more of the fun stuff in the subscriptions.
Yeah.
So that it's not always so. I always feel like when you're trying to share stuff on regular social media, you can only give like a teeny tiny bit. And
Yeah.
after a while, if I were a follower, I'd be like, all right, when are we getting the good stuff? So I'm trying to move everyone into the subscribers so that at least they get the good stuff. So yeah, that's where I'm at right now. I think Instagram is probably your best bet, and the podcast, which comes out every Tuesday.
So definitely the podcast, because you're going to get everything.
Yep.
So we're talking about censorship, and I know you mentioned this to me, and it made me laugh what you said. So you wrote, why do I know what Kim Kardashian's nipple look like, but I'm not allowed to say vulva?
Oh, it drives me nuts. It's so true. It's so true. It's like I can map that woman's areola. Why? But if I want to just talk about even just safe sex practices, like we haven't even touched pleasure, like I can't even talk about that stuff, and I will get a content violation. And after a certain amount of content violations, they will kick you off the app. And I'm in a point of extreme privilege in this industry because I came from like mainstream media. I came from Netflix. So they're not kicking me off as quickly as they will someone who started in the sex work industry, and you're bringing that onto Instagram. I've seen people get kicked off with one content violation and they'll just remove you from the app. It's crazy. Did that happen to you?
Loads of times. They
It's
don't give you no
crazy.
warning. They don't give you no warning. They just one day you're there, and the next day you're gone.
Yep.
So it's a constant battle with Instagram. I'm on a different plateau right now. I'm moving forward. I had to change my link tree. So my link tree literally just has my podcast and my Twitter and TikTok and YouTube. But when you look at everyone else's link tree, it's got OnlyFans, VIP. I can't have that, because when I put it, they delete me. And so I've had lawyers talk to their lawyers, and that was the response.
Wow.
On your link tree, you have this listed.
That's crazy.
They pick and choose who they want to take down. They
100%.
I guess it's a rabbit hole, isn't it? So what we have to do is work with what we can.
Yeah.
So it's is getting on what we can, giving little snippets. Sometimes the snippets have to be more extremely PG friendly compared to other people's snippets,
Yeah. I had a meeting with someone at Meta like a month or two ago, and I asked her, I was like, what's the deal with the censorship? Like, what is the rule? Because sometimes things get through. Like, I made a video today about praise kinks. That one's still up, totally fine. Still, I think it's still monetized, but I've made things that are way more tame, and those end up getting taken down. And the rule that she told me that they have in the Meta office is if you can say it out loud at Disneyland, you can say it on these apps, which infuriates me because Disneyland. I was like, but this is not Disneyland. This is an app that you have to be a certain age to even sign up for. And what I don't understand is how have they not just created the option to have 18 plus accounts and you have to
Yeah.
be over 18 to be able to either follow this person or see this specific post.
Yeah.
Why have we not done that? I think that's so silly.
Well, let's think about like the age of people that go to Disneyland. We're talking
Babies.
under 13s, and you've got to be at least 13 years of age to be
Mhm.
on Instagram. So it's kind of
It's
but then like you've just said a bad word. You
Mhm.
couldn't say that in Disneyland.
Right.
Like, so, violation.
Right, exactly. It's like I remember once we had Sin Sage on one of the episodes or two of the episodes of the podcast actually, and she was talking about I think she was talking about maybe like porn censorship or I can't remember exactly what it was, but she was like, I'm an adult. I would like to have adult things. Why can't I have adult things? And I was like, I understand. That's how I feel all the time about that stupid Disneyland comment. I'm like, I am an adult. I want to share adult things with other adults. Like, why can't we have that? I don't get it. And honestly, I think it's just sexuality is such like a hot button thing because people are so ashamed. They've tied all this morality to it. They think you are a better person if you waited until marriage to have sex. They think you're a better person if you're a virgin. Like it's just, and that's just simply not true. It's never been true. It's a lie. It's a control mechanism. It's just not, and like, just don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. But you know what? The meta people have to whatever, I guess, keep their business afloat.
Yeah, it's their platform, isn't it? And talking about sex education, if you was in Disneyland, you couldn't stand there with a megaphone talking about sex education. Mickey Mouse would never have sex. Well,
Right.
probably because it's a person in a costume.
Right.
The person in the costume
absolutely
has sex, by the way.
You know what? I had a friend who worked at Disney for years, and the people who work at Disney, depraved. There is so much crazy stuff that happens for the adults that work at Disney, so I don't want to hear it from Meta.
So we spoke about OnlyFans, and OnlyFans has been opening up for a career platform for many creators. So people are coming on, brand newbies that have been in many mainstream careers. I interviewed a policewoman, teachers, nurses, office workers, shop workers. Cam models are coming forward, established adult stars. So I've got to ask, do you think that there is a need for creators of X-rated content to also receive educational support?
That's interesting. I'm sure to some degree, yes, because even things like those, they're still real people in their everyday lives. Like it's not like they step off a set and if they're a mom, they suddenly know how to educate their child on sexuality when they're, teenagers. That I think that there's always things that you can learn. And I largely know that because I feel like I've never learned enough ever. And I do this all the live long day. And so there's always something to learn. I actually have never thought about bringing education, like this education to OnlyFans, but I'm going to noodle on that. But yeah, I think there's always something to learn. There's always something to learn. Even like a couple of days ago, I was listening to a lecture and it was literally called Awesome Anal. I was like, I love my job. I love what I do. But even just knowing that if you're going to have anal sex, it doesn't have to be painful. And there are absolutely ways to make it not nearly as painful as it would be if you were not prepared. And if you are somebody who's new to any sort of type of sex work, you might not know that, or you might have been in the industry forever and just assuming that this is normal and fine because no one has ever taught you anything different. And for really anyone, I think there's a level of sex education that is for you. There's a level of sex education that is for every single age, all the way up through all levels of experience, because it's so multifaceted. It has so much to do with our emotions, but also has a lot to do with biology. And there's so much there. There's so much to learn. So yeah,
I'm going to ask you. It's just come to my mind. When two people have sex, right? Okay,
yes.
so you go, and sometimes you might know the person, or you might have seen the person, or for me, you know, I might know the name for someone that is might be on a date in a you know, regular civilian.
Sure.
Like that chemistry, like why is it like some people you see, oh, they look really hot, and then
Yeah.
they get there and the chemistry is like it's
Yeah.
not fitting, and you're like, damn it,
That's the worst.
chemistry.
Yeah,
Like,
but I think that there are ways that you can sort of manufacture chemistry. There's a therapist, a sex therapist, who says that chemistry has a lot more to do with timing than it has to do, or the success of a relationship has more to do with timing than it does actual chemistry. Because if you are both at a time in your life where you're willing to work out whatever the like lack of natural chemistry might be, whether it's just a sexual relationship or you're trying to date the person, there's always, if the first time you sleep with someone it's awkward, doesn't mean that it's going to be awkward forever. They might need the map that we talked about earlier. So you
yeah,
need to give them the map, and then you
yeah,
manufacture the chemistry. And I think too, people put a big amount of pressure and stress on someone who is like ultimately a stranger to be able to know exactly what to do, even outside of the sexual realm. And I think that what feels like chemistry is when someone speaks the same romantic language for you, so you don't feel like you have to translate yourself. And I feel like that's what ends up being like the feeling of chemistry. It's like, oh my God, this person gets it. And
yeah.
that's amazing. But there are times where the chemistry isn't going to be there in the very beginning. That doesn't mean it can't be made later on.
Nice, thank you. I just that thought come to my head then.
That's the worst.
Oh, we could make it. So I want to ask you, you're an adult, you've obviously watched porn. So
Yeah.
where do you think that porn falls when it comes to education? Like where education and porn, like give
Yeah.
me your take on it.
Well, I think the biggest thing is that porn is meant to be entertainment. It's not meant to be education. And like that alone, that precedent alone, I've spoken to some people who are adult actresses or actors that say that they do feel like they're educating when they're performing. And then there are some who have said, I don't feel like I'm educating, and don't use me as education because I'm performing. And so I think part of it is the way that the consumer approaches it, and assuming that everything that you see in porn is exactly how you should do it in real life. I think the other thing, like, which is, I mean, but people really think that. People really
Yeah,
think that.
yeah. So,
Um,
yeah, porn, everything you see in porn, it's a lot of it, especially with the studios, it's scripted and
mhm.
it's ready. And, you know, to a certain extent, as an actor and actress, you can put your own creativity into it, but you're still following an overall agenda of what the studio requires.
Totally. And I think it's interesting that when people watch regular TV or movies, they understand that this is scripted, and that what you think is spontaneity was something that was planned in a script months and months ago, and they did this take 10 times. But for some reason, when you're watching porn, you just assume that all of that is spontaneous and all of that is as realistic as you're receiving it. And that's just not true. And there's also a lot of conversations that happen before you even get on to the actual set that
Yeah,
are about the things that you want to do, the things that you don't want to do.
consent.
Yeah, all of the consent conversations, especially when it comes to anything kink, BDSM, like those
Mhm.
types of content, where they had extensive conversations about what they were comfortable with, what they weren't comfortable with. They have a safe word, and they're not talking about that in the beginning because it ruins like the fantasy of it. But I think the biggest thing is to just remember as a consumer that this is entertainment.
Mhm.
This is not education. And you can use some of it for inspiration, but
Mhm.
know that like inspiration coming from porn is like inspiration coming from a Disney movie. There's only so much you can do to make that a reality, because
We all
they've
wanna be a
given you,
princess.
we all want to be a
Wanna be the
princess.
Disney princess.
And like, but as many times as you kiss a frog, it's still a frog, babe. So there's only so much. So yeah.
So cute.
It's true. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I wish that there were types of porn that allowed for especially with things that feel or are being received as like especially aggressive or violent. I wish that they showed more of like what the before and the aftercare look
Like
like.
more of about behind the scenes as well,
Yeah.
how kind of like this is the final product, but then this is like a
Yeah.
timeline of before and then
Yeah.
going after. Like this is what happens all around the polished
Right.
final piece.
Exactly. I remember only once I have seen a video that was a fantasy.
But
And where they in the beginning, that it was a couple, like a married couple who are the actors in it, and they have a conversation in the beginning that is like, "We both consent to this activity. We understand that this is something that we're doing because it turns us on, but this is
mhm,
by no means real. And so if you have feelings where you want to act this situation out in real life, this is not that. And
yeah,
these are some resources for you in that circumstance." And that was like one of the most responsible approaches to porn I've
yeah,
ever seen. But now there's a whole category of porn that's like ethical porn and ethically made porn, and it's labeled as such. And the people who are producing those types of film, I feel like, try to make things more realistic. So it's just a
mhm,
different side of the coin that you can
yeah.
experience if that's something that you're looking for too.
Yeah, it is. But it is, it's knowing you can take pieces of it, but knowing that it is an act and it is
Yeah.
a form of entertainment.
Mhm.
So if somebody has a question about sex ed, because they might be sitting here listening now and they're like, Alyssa, I need to ask you this. Like, where can they ask you? How do they get to ask you?
You can go on my Instagram, and if you want to subscribe, I'll get your message a lot easier. You can always DM me, and I will do my very best. But you can also send us an email to the podcast, which is Alyssa Explains It All pod at gmail.com. And if you want me to answer it on the podcast, I can do that. If you want me to answer via email, I can do that too. Just let me know. And I'm always around to help. I try to make as much of what I do free or super low cost because I think people have a right to know all of this
Yeah.
stuff, and it's been so like gatekept for our entire lives. So if you send me an email, more chances than not, I will be able to answer your question.
Thank you. And just one last question I want to ask you. What is the one thing as a sex educator that you wish that everyone knew?
Ooh. What I say all the time is wetter is better. And if you can include, like, lube is like the most baby step of advancements, of like improvements, add-ons into your sex life, use it. It'll change your life. It'll make everything so much better. Wetter is always better. So get a really nice lube for yourself,
Mhm.
and don't be afraid to use it. There's nothing wrong with that. It's super fun. It's really it makes everything just more comfortable. So that'll be my biggest tip. Wetter is better. And also find ways to communicate with your partner so that you can actually have a shared experience of what you're both looking for, because no one's a mind reader.
Yeah, exactly. I love that. Wetter is better. Like that's one
Yes.
great bit of advice. Thank you. And I know that you just said, go and check you out on the channels, but did you give the URLs of your
Oh, I don't
TikTok?
know. I don't know.
Tell them all your URLs so that
Okay.
it's a little bit easier for them.
Okay, you can find me on TikTok, Instagram. I have a Twitter, but I don't really use it. Pretty much anywhere at Alyssa Ljub, and it's ALYSSALJUB.
Yeah.
And if you want to check out the podcast, it's Alyssa Explains It All. And if you want to send me an email, Alyssa Explains It All pod, POD at gmail.com. And I think that's it. I think that's all my things.
Yay. Thank you so much. It's been amazing having you and enlightening people on sex education. And thank you for being an amazing resource for us all.
Thank you. It's been an honor to be here. I'm so grateful.
Thank you.
Woohoo!
This Tanya Tate. Skinfluencer